Get out of this seat. People like you don't usually belong in first class, Victoria sneered, clutching her designer tote as if it gave her authority. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, none of them realizing the black woman she tried to dismiss could, with a single order, ground the very plane she sat on. Inside JFK's bustling terminal, the air hummed with boarding calls, the roll of luggage wheels and the muted chatter of travelers chasing connections among the polished suits in designer handbags of first class. Quinella Arroyo stood with quiet dignity. At 41, her presence carried both grace and command. She wore a tailored ivory blazer over soft silk, minimal jewelry, and short, close-cropped hair that framed her angular face. To anyone else, she looked like a businesswoman traveling alone. What no one saw was that she wasn't just a passenger. She was the chairwoman, majority shareholder, and CEO of Pinnacle Airways itself. Seat 2A was printed clearly on her boarding pass, a window seat in the premium cabin. But as she arrived, a woman already sat there. Blonde hair swept into a flawless, shiny, a Vuitton tote perched like a trophy on the armrest. Victoria Hartwell, Pinnacle Platinum member, property heiress, and self-proclaimed VIP. She glanced up from her phone, blue eyes flicking over Quinella with a practiced dismissal. "Oh," Victoria said, her voice sweetly poisonous. "I think you must be mistaken. This is 2A. I specifically requested it." Quinella's tone was even. "Yes, it's my assigned seat. May I see your boarding pass?" Victoria gave a little laugh, the kind meant to summon sympathy from onlookers. "Oh, sweetheart, I've already settled in. Why don't you find another? I'm sure they can move you somewhere more appropriate." The word appropriate hung in the air like a slap. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man coughed into his newspaper. A woman pulled her child closer. Some averted their eyes, others leaned forward, curious. Everyone knew the ritual, a subtle questioning of who belonged and who did not. Quinella drew a breath. She'd heard variations of this her entire life at Ivy League lecture halls and boardrooms, even at charity galas, where she was the keynote speaker. It was always the same coded disbelief. "You don't fit the picture in my mind of power." She held out her boarding pass. "This is my seat. 2A. Victoria didn't even look. She smoothed the folds of her cashmere wrap and tilted her head with exaggerated patience. "I've been flying Pinnacle for 12 years. Platinum status. I know how things work. I'm sure the crew can find you something suitable further back." She has no idea that the woman standing before her could decide the fate of this airline with one signature. The first-class cabin grew tense. A flight attendant approached Sarah Chen uniform, crisp, smile professional. She glanced from Quinella to Victoria, then offered a suggestion that made Quinella's stomach tighten. "Perhaps, Ms. Royce, you'd consider another seat in first class. We do have 3C available. It would save us some time. What happens next will shock you because this wasn't just about a chair. It was about dignity itself." Quinella studied Sarah carefully. The younger woman wasn't malicious, just following the path of least resistance, asking the black passenger to adjust. It was a dance Quinella knew too well. She lowered her voice, calm but edged. "Why should I be moved when my boarding pass says 2A8? Sarah hesitated, glancing at Victoria. The platinum member smiled sweetly as though the matter were settled. Behind them, a young woman, Zoe Kim, college student with a phone angled discreetly, was already streaming live to a few hundred followers. Her caption read, "First-class drama unfolding at JFK." The camera caught Quinella's steady expression, Victoria's dismissive smir, and Sarah's uneasy diplomacy. Within minutes, comments began scrolling. "Looks like discrimination. Stay strong, sis. Who's right here?" Quinella felt a familiar flare of anger, but she kept it buried under decades of discipline. She thought of the board meetings where men twice her age had dismissed her questions only to praise the same point when repeated by a white colleague. She thought of the journalist who had once asked if she was really the CEO or just the spokesperson. This moment was no different. A stranger had looked at her and decided, "You don't belong." But Victoria didn't know. She didn't know that Quinella's family trust had financed Pinnacle's last fleet expansion. She didn't know that the reservation system printing her precious ticket bore Quinella's approval. She didn't know that the woman she was trying to displace could, with a single message, ground the entire flight. Quinella folded her boarding pass. carefully slid it back into her pocket and straightened. Her voice carried through the cabin, low but unmistakable. "I'm not moving. This is my seat." The silence that followed was electric. Passengers leaned in, phones angled discreetly. Even the captain's door cracked open as word of the dispute reached the cockpit. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Listen carefully," she hissed, dropping her genteel mask. "I don't know what scam you're trying to run, but it won't work on me. People like you don't usually sit in first class. Everyone here knows it." Gas rippled through the cabin. Zoe's live stream chat exploded, viewers leaping from hundreds to thousands. Comments scrolled faster than she could read. Did she really just say that clip this unbelievable? Quinella's heart hammered, but her face was composed marble. She had spent a lifetime preparing for moments exactly like this. She turned slowly, scanning the cabin, her gaze steady on every watching eye. Then she looked back at Victoria, who sat smug and unrepentant, certain her platinum status gave her unshakable power. But there's something Victoria Hartwell doesn't know. The silence after Victoria Hartwell's words felt heavier than any announcement from the cockpit. "People like you don't usually sit here." The sentence had been delivered with such casual cruelty that even passengers pretending not to listen froze in place. Quinella Royce did not flinch. She stood tall beside seat 2A, her tailored ivory blazer falling neatly against her frame, her boarding pass held like quiet evidence. She spoke softly, but her words carried through the hushed cabin. "This is my seat, and I'm not moving." The ripple moved instantly across the row of business travelers, through the families clutching iPads, and into the silence of passengers who had flown enough times to recognize when an ordinary flight had suddenly become something more. Victoria gave a short-cutting laugh. "Oh, please don't embarrass yourself. I've flown Pinnacle for 12 years. Platinum status. Window seat, left side. That's always mine. I'm sure they can move you somewhere more appropriate." The word hung in the air, bitter as jet fuel. Sarah Chen, the lead flight attendant, stepped closer. Her polished shoes clicked against the carpet. She smiled, the kind of strained smile built from customer service training manuals. "Miss Royce, perhaps we can resolve this quickly. There is an excellent seat in 3C. I'll personally ensure you're comfortable there." Quinella turned her head slowly, deliberately. Her gaze was level, her tone calm. "What you are suggesting is that the rightful passenger should give up her seat so that the one who feels entitled doesn't have to. That's not resolution. That's surrender." Murmurs rippled. An older couple in row 4 exchanged glances of recognition. A young professional leaned forward, phone in hand, recording discreetly. This decision will cost Victoria more than she could ever imagine. Victoria's smirk deepened, but her voice lost some of its airy charm. "Why could such a fuss? You'll only make yourself look unreasonable. People like me, we know how this world works." Quinella's heart stirred with memories. The smirks across conference tables, the dismissals cloaked in politeness, the investor who once asked her to bring a white male partner to gain credibility. Each slight was a scar, and those scars now formed her armor. Her voice dropped to a low measured register. "Respect matters more than comfort. If I must choose, I choose respect every time." Passengers shifted. The woman in seat 4C let out a quiet yes, but Victoria pressed harder, sensing the crowd's attention slipping from her. She tilted her head with mock sweetness. "Do you even know who I am?" Quinella allowed a brief silence, then answered with a faint smile. "Not yet, but you'll learn who I am soon enough." It was not a threat. It was a statement of inevitability. 3 rows back, 21-year-old Zoe Kim adjusted her phone. She had been live streaming from the moment she sensed the tension at boarding. What began with a few hundred viewers had exploded into thousands. Comments scrolled so quickly she could barely catch them. "She's right. Stand your ground." Classic discrimination caught in real time. "I've been through this exact thing," Zoe whispered into her mic. "This isn't just about a seat. It's about dignity. What do you think? Should she give in or hold firm?" The chat flooded with responses. "Hold firm. Never give in. She represents all of us." The ripple effect is about to reach far beyond this cabin, and this is exactly why we share these moments on Black Stories Unveiled. Because when arrogance collides with hidden power, the outcome shakes more than one room. It shakes the system itself. Sarah hesitated near the cockpit door, torn between protocol and conscience. She glanced back at Quinella, who stood silent, unyielding. Victoria folded her arms. Honestly, you're just making trouble. If you knew how travel works, you'd understand flexibility. Sometimes people like you should be grateful for the chance to be here at all. Gasps. A man in row 5 muttered, "Unbelievable." Another raised his phone openly, no longer trying to hide it. Quinella's breath was steady, but inside the fire rose. She remembered her mother's voice. "When they tell you to move, you stand taller." And she did. Her shoulders squared, her eyes swept the cabin. She was no longer just a woman defending a seat. She had become a mirror reflecting every silent injustice the passengers had witnessed in their own lives. Behind her, Zoe's screen ticked past 20,000 live viewers. Twitter alerts pinged across devices. Hashtags began forming in real time. Someone typed, "Cure your seat for respect." Another, "Quinella Royce." The spark had leapt beyond the cabin walls. Meanwhile, Quinella spoke again, her voice softer than before, but sharpened by conviction. "This isn't just about a boarding pass. It's about the constant demand that we accept less so others can have more. And I won't accept that." The cabin felt united in silence. Even those who had avoided eye contact were watching now. Victoria's face tightened. "Fine. Let's bring the captain. We'll see who he sides with." Her finger pressed the call button. The chime echoed like a warning bell. Sarah disappeared into the cockpit. Cornella closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. She knew this confrontation was far from over, and she knew without seeing Zoe's phone that eyes beyond the cabin were already fixed on her. For the first time in years, she wasn't just a CEO hidden behind polished press releases. She was a black woman in real time standing against dismissal with the world bearing witness. The door latch clicked. The captain was preparing to step out. The stakes had climbed from one seat to something much larger. Respect, justice, visibility. And this was only the beginning. The cockpit door swung open with a solid click, and Captain Rodriguez stepped into the cabin. Silver hair at his temple, steady voice honed by decades in the skies, he carried the aura of authority passengers trusted. But as his eyes scanned the tense scene, he found no turbulence of weather or engine. The storm was human. "Good afternoon," he began, his tone firm but polite. "I understand there's a seating issue that needs to be resolved." Victoria straightened instantly, her face rearranging into the polished mask of a wrong customer. "Captain, thank goodness you're here. There's been a mix-up. I requested this seat. I've been a loyal Platinum member for years. This woman is making a scene and refusing to be flexible." She gestured at Quinella as though presenting evidence in court. Quinella stood silent, composed, watching the reactions ripple across the passengers. Some avoided eye contact. Others waited with bated breath. A handful already had their phones angled carefully, capturing every second. The captain turned to her. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Without hesitation, Quinella handed it over. The captain's brow furrowed as he read C2A, First Class Royce. He looked back at Victoria. "Mrs. Hartwell, do you have your pass?" Victoria's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, producing a crumpled slip. "2C, but I specifically requested a left side window when I booked. It must have been a system error." "Surely we can work this out without ruining the flight for everyone?" Her words were coded in civility, but beneath them lay the expectation that the captain would side with her. She had seen it work countless times before authority bending toward wealth and entitlement. The captain exhaled slowly. "Miss Hartwell, your boarding pass clearly says 2C. This seat belongs to Ms. Royce." Gas fluttered through the cabin, but before anyone could believe resolution had arrived, the captain added, "That said, in situations like this, we sometimes look for compromises. Perhaps Ms. Royce would be willing to switch to another seat so we can depart on time." The air froze. Quinella lifted her chin slightly, her eyes never leaving the captain's. "So your solution is for the person with the valid seat assignment to surrender her place while the one who refused to move is rewarded." A murmur of agreement rose from several passengers. In row 4, the older black couple nodded, eyes sharp with recognition. This is the moment when the mask of authority reveals its bias. Victoria pounced on the opening. You see, even the captain understands the need for flexibility. Surely she can take 3C and we can move on. Her voice dripped with triumph, but the triumph was premature because Quinn-Ella Royce did not yield. She had yielded too many times before in other arenas. Not today. Her voice remained calm, but every syllable rang clear. Captain, let me ask you directly. At what point does customer service become discrimination? When a white passenger claims a seat that isn't hers, and the black passenger with a legitimate ticket is asked to move. What do you call that? The question cracked the air like lightning. The captain stiffened, caught in the crosshairs of fairness and habit. He opened his mouth, but before he could answer, a voice came from row 3. Excuse me. All heads turned. A Latina woman with silver-streaked hair and a press badge clipped to her blazer rose slightly. Elena Vasquez, senior correspondent, Washington Post. I've been observing this entire interaction, and I can tell you exactly what it looks like a civil rights violation in real time. Victoria's face went pale. You can't just, this is private. Elena cut her off. When discrimination happens in public accommodations, it's not private. And when it happens in front of witnesses, especially recorded witnesses, it becomes part of the public record. Her phone was already in her hand screen, glowing with notes. The hum of the cabin surged, phones lifted openly, now passengers no longer pretending. The sense of spectacle was undeniable. What happens next will shock you because power is about to shift in a way Victoria never imagined. Victoria's voice rose shrill. This is ridiculous. You people are blowing this out of proportion. The phrase struck like a bomb. Gasp mutters disbelief. From row 5. Zoe whispered into her phone. Did you hear that? She said, you people, we're at 60,000 viewers right now and it's climbing fast. The live stream chat ignited, caught in 4K. She really said it unacceptable. Passengers who had been silent now looked openly disgusted. The older couple in row 4 shook their heads. A young man whispered to his seatmate, she just ended herself. The captain looked visibly rattled. He knew the weight of those 2 words. He turned toward Victoria, his voice lower now. Mrs. Hartwell, I strongly suggest you consider the optics here. This is not going to end the way you think. But Victoria doubled down. Antique entitlement rarely retreats easily. I won't be lectured. I've flown this airline longer than some of you have worked here. I deserve respect. Quinn-Ella finally spoke again. Her voice was almost gentle, yet it silenced the cabin. Respect isn't earned by years of loyalty points. It's earned by how you treat the person standing in front of you. A hush fell. Even the engines seemed quieter. Elena typed furiously, already framing the headline in her mind. Zoe's viewer count soared past 100,000. Clips raced across platforms, Twitter threads, dissecting Victoria's words. TikTok edits with captions screaming privilege exposed at 30,000 FD. The viral spark had become ablaze. Quinn-Ella remained standing, her calm demeanor unshaken. But inside, she calculated she couldn't yet reveal the full truth that she was the owner of the airline. That would come later. For now, she needed only to let the truth of entitlement and injustice play out, documented for the world. Still, she allowed herself one small gesture, a hint of her power. She pulled out her phone sleek and unassuming. Her thumb moved across the screen with quiet precision. Passengers noticed. Phones captured it. To them, it was just a woman texting. But those who would later watch the footage would speculate, what was she doing? Who was she contacting? Why did her calm never break? It was the first power hint, the sense that Quinn-Ella was more than she appeared, that she held levers invisible to everyone else. Victoria scoffed, misreading it entirely. Text whoever you want. It won't change the fact that this is my seat now. But the look in Quinn-Ella's eyes, measured, deliberate, told another story. And in that look, the balance of power had already shifted. The captain ran a hand over his jaw, clearly aware that whatever decision he made would not stay in this cabin. Elena's presence, the dozens of phones recording the viral live stream. It all meant the story was already bigger than this flight. He cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to step back into the cockpit to consult with ground control. Please remain seated. He disappeared, leaving the passengers buzzing like a hive. Victoria tried to reclaim the stage. "See, he'll fix this. You'll be moved." But her voice sounded less confident now. The cabin no longer bent toward her. It bent toward Quinella, whose calm had become the gravitational center of the room. And beyond the cabin, the world was already taking sides. By the time the plane's wheels were still on the tarmac, hashtags had climbed into trending ranks. Add seat for respect. Quinella Royce had you people. Twitter threads carried eyewitness accounts. Instagram reels looped Victoria's words. TikTok parodies began within minutes. And Quinella Roy, still silent, still composed, became a symbol without even revealing her identity. The stakes had grown. What began as a stolen seat was now a trial in the court of public opinion. And the verdict was only beginning to form. The cabin remained hushed even after Captain Rodriguez retreated into the cockpit. The silence wasn't calm. It was the brittle quiet before a storm breaks. Passengers checked their phones, whispers darted from row to row, and cameras kept rolling. But outside the aircraft, the storm had already escaped its cage. On social media, Zoe Kim's livestream had crossed 200,000 viewers. Hashtags ballooned across feeds. Seat for respect. The You People Flight 1847. Clips circulated faster than turbulence, each more damning than the last. Some froze on Victoria's words, others on the captain's hesitation, still others on Quinella's unwavering calm. The ripple effect was now a wave, and it was headed straight for Pinnacle Airways headquarters. In a glass tower overlooking Midtown Manhattan, the operations floor buzzed with routine until one analyst spotted the trending tag. He clicked, expecting another celebrity spat, but his stomach dropped as he recognized the company logo on the boarding passes in the clips. Within minutes, executives' phones buzzed in unison. Screens lit up with links. Platinum passenger accuses black woman in first class You People. Captain suggests legitimate passenger move. The head of corporate communications pad. Where's the incident report? Who logged this silence? No one had. The incident wasn't even supposed to exist beyond that cabin. Yet the internet had already turned it into a courtroom. This isn't just about one seat. It's about the integrity of the entire airline. Back on the plane, Victoria tried to salvage her crumbling authority. She leaned forward, voice low, but still audible. "You're making this worse for yourself. All this attention, it'll ruin you. Do you think anyone important will side with you when they find out you caused a scene?" Quinella's eyes didn't waver. Her reply was a whisper, yet it reached every corner. "It isn't me this attention is ruining." Phones caught it. Within seconds, the line was clipped, captioned, and replayed thousands of times. "It isn't me this attention is ruining." Viewers cheered in comments, seeing not just defiance but strategy. At Pinnacle headquarters, panic spread like fire in dry grass. Emergency calls lit up. The chief operations officer barked orders. "Get me Rodriguez on the line. I need details before this becomes national news, sir," a junior manager stammered. "It already is." Screens in the control room displayed Twitter trending panels, YouTube uploads, TikTok loops. News outlets were drafting pieces in real time. A voice cracked over the speakerphone. "Do you know who she is?" The room went silent. No one answered. The question wasn't about Victoria Hartwell. Everyone knew her, a wealthy developer, a high-value platinum customer. The real question was about the woman she had dismissed, the one standing her ground with unnerving calm. Who was Quinn Loy? Back in the cabin, tension thickened. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. We are addressing a matter that requires ground coordination." Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Whispers turned into conversations. "They're delaying the flight. Is this about that seat? This is unbelievable." But disbelief wasn't limited to the passengers. In the boardroom, the airline's general counsel leaned forward, voice tight. "We have a risk scenario. If this escalates, we're not talking about one disgruntled passenger. We're talking discrimination liability, civil rights exposure, FAA review, and if she sues, she wants another cut in. She doesn't need to. The internet is already prosecuting us." On the ground, reporters began converging at JFK. Tweets announcing incident on Pinnacle Airways flight caught local stringers' attention. Camera crews rolled toward the gate, certain the story would still be alive when the plane returned. Executives scrambled. "Get a draft statement ready," ordered the communications chief. "Use the words unfortunate misunderstanding, customer comfort, respect." The room buzzed, but one intern scrolling frantically on her own phone whispered, "Won't work. She's trending at 500,000 views already. They've seen everything." In the cabin, Victoria felt the shift. Her bluster was cracking. She tried again, her voice pitched higher. "You don't understand. People like me. Our loyalty keeps this airline running. Do you think the company will side with you over me?" Quinella's gaze remained steady. "What I think is that respect isn't negotiable. Not for me. Not for anyone." The words landed like a verdict. Zoe's live stream counter ticked past 300,000. Comments swelled. "She's teaching a master class. This is bigger than a seat. It's systemic. Protect her at all costs." At headquarters, panic evolved into dread because alongside the live stream clips, analysts were tracking another problem. The airline's pending deal, a multi-billion-dollar logistics contract with an international tech partner, was scheduled for signing within days. That partner's leadership was known for their diversity commitments. If the viral narrative linked Pinnacle with systemic discrimination, the deal could collapse. The CFO slammed his fist on the table. "If we lose that contract, it's not just bad press. It's a 5-year revenue anchor gone. Do you understand what's at stake?" Everyone understood. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the first hints of the outside world reached inside. A young man scrolled news alerts aloud. "It's already on CNN's feed. They're picking it up." Victoria stiffened. "CNN? That's ridiculous. They won't care about a seat." But the man shook his head. "It's not about the seat anymore. It's about you saying, 'You people.'" The color drained from her face. Passengers turned to look at her, not with curiosity now, but with open disdain. The captain re-emerged, his face drawn. "Ladies and gentlemen, ground control has instructed us to delay departure until this matter is resolved. I need cooperation." The cabin buzzed louder. Phones lit up with notifications. Some passengers groaned about misconnections. Others muttered about justice being overdue. Quinella remained still, every inch of her body language, projecting calm certainty. She didn't need to raise her voice. The world outside was already amplifying it for her. At headquarters, the CEO of Pinnacle Airways, unaware that the woman at the center of the storm owned controlling shares, paced furiously. "Fix it," he barked. "I don't care how. Upgrade her. Comp her. Fire someone if you have to. Just stop the bleeding before we lose that deal." But the bleeding had already soaked through. Hashtags had hit global trending lists. Other airlines were being tagged by customers demanding assurances. Lawmakers were being pinged by advocacy groups. The cost wasn't measured in seats anymore. It was measured in millions. What happens inside one cabin can unravel years of corporate strategy. Quinella, silent among the chaos, allowed herself a brief glance at her phone. A single message flashed from her private assistant Media, requesting comment. "Do you want to respond?" Her fingers hovered, then typed a single line. "Not yet. Let them underestimate me longer." It was another hint of power, subtle, precise. She wasn't scrambling like the airline. She was waiting, watching, calculating. In the boardroom, the comms chief read aloud from her draft statement. "Pinnacle Airways regrets the unfortunate misunderstanding aboard Flight 1947. We value all customers and are investigating." "Stop." The general counsel raised a hand. "If we call this a misunderstanding and the videos show clear bias, we're finished." The CFO added grimly. "We may already be finished if the partner pulls out." Executives stared at one another, their empire trembling, because one woman had refused to move from the seat she rightfully owned. And that woman, unknown to them, was not just any passenger. She was the very owner whose name appeared in confidential shareholder files. The irony was exquisite. Back on the plane, Zoe whispered, "Viewers, we've crossed 400,000. This isn't slowing down. Comment what you think should happen next. Does she reveal who she is or hold it back?" The responses poured in. "Hold it back. Let them sweat. She'll reveal at the perfect time." And Quinella, as if sensing the pulse of strangers she couldn't see, remained still. Her silence louder than Victoria's rage. At headquarters, One executive finally voiced the unthinkable. What if she's more than just a passenger? Heads turned. Silence thickened. What do you mean? The CEO demanded. The executive swallowed hard. I mean, what if she has leverage we don't know about? She hasn't said much. She hasn't threatened lawsuits. She hasn't raised her voice. She's waiting. The room grew colder because they all knew only someone with real power waits that calmly. And on the tarmac, in a cabin full of restless passengers and buzzing phones, Quinn Royce folded her arms, eyes steady. She knew the panic unfolding far above them in glass towers. She knew the risks to contract stock and reputation. What waited beyond this cabin would shake more than the passengers. It would shake the entire industry. The cabin had grown restless. Passengers shifted phones, buzzed. Whispers turned into open commentary. Some murmured about missed connections, but most knew they were watching something far more significant than a delay. Victoria Hartwell still clung to her seat, though her confidence was fraying. Her phone vibrated with calls from friends. She ignored texts flashing across the screen. You're trending, not in a good way. Quinn Royce, by contrast, sat in quiet stillness. She had finally taken her rightful place in 2A. Her posture was regal without effort, her face unreadable, as if the turbulence around her was background noise. And then her phone lit up, not with a random call or text, but with a secured notification. She unlocked it, typed a short code, impressed a single command. The screen displayed CEO access verified. Pinnacle Airways control. Passengers nearby gasped. They couldn't make sense of it. Why did her phone interface look different? Why did it have options no passenger should see? Zoe caught it on her live stream. Her viewers did not miss a beat. Comments flooded in. What did she just open? Is that the airline system? No way she has that kind of access. Quinella didn't explain. She didn't need to. She pressed another button. Seconds later, Captain Rodriguez's radio crackled. Flight 1947, ground control override in effect. Return to gate immediately. Order issued from corporate authority. The captain's eyes widened. He glanced back into the cabin at Quinella. Realization dawning. His voice, when it came over the intercom, was taut. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been instructed to return to the gate. Confusion rippled. What's happening? Did she just? And then Quinella finally spoke, her voice calm, carrying across the stunned cabin. I suppose I should introduce myself properly. My name is Quinella Royce. I am the majority shareholder and chief executive officer of Pinnacle Airways, which means Mrs. Hartwell. She turned her gaze to the woman still clutching her handbag as though it could shield her, that this isn't just my seat, this is my plane. The reaction was seismic. Gasp murmurs, as phones thrust higher into the air. Victoria's face went bloodless, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Her true identity changes everything. Zoe's viewer count skyrocketed past 1 million. Clips flew to Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Each caption more breathless than the last passenger refuses to move until she reveals she owns the airline. CEO grounds her own flight, and after racist encounter, and the world devoured it. Somewhere far away in a glossy boardroom, Pinnacle's executives stared at screens replaying the scene. One muttered, "She's our boss." Another whispered, "She's been on this flight the whole time." The irony was devastating. They had scrambled to contain the story, not realizing the very person at the center of it had the power to topple them all. The CFO rubbed his forehead. If she turns this against us, the stock will crater. Too late. After hours, markets had already opened their jaws. Pinnacle shares plummeted. Bookings were being canceled in real-time notifications, buzzing across the sales dashboard like alarms. The ripple effect is about to become an earthquake. Victoria finally found her voice. It cracked as she spoke. I didn't know who you were. Quinella's expression softened, but only slightly. That's the problem. You didn't need to know who I was. All you needed was to respect that I was a person with a boarding pass. That was enough. But you decided it wasn't. The truth of it rang like a bell. Passengers shifted some nodding. The older couple in row 4 held hands, tears in their eyes. One whispered finally. Someone said it plain. Zoe's audience swelled again past 2 million. Commenters poured in, "This is history. Teach them, Quinna. I'm crying watching this." And this is why we exist at Black Stories Unveiled. Because when power reveals itself with dignity, the whole world pays attention. Not through rage alone, but through truth so undeniable it cannot be ignored. On the ground, newsrooms lit up like Christmas trees. CNN, NBC, BBC all scrambled to update feeds. The Today Show teased the clip for morning broadcasts. The Washington Post prepared Elena Vasquez's story with the headline, "Black CEO Grounds Her Own Flight After Passengers' Racist Refusal." By midnight, it would be everywhere. By dawn, it would dominate the cycle. Victoria crumbled. She clutched at her bag, voice trembling. "I didn't mean I was just." Quinella's eyes stayed steady. "You didn't mean to be caught. That's the difference." The line landed like a gavel. Phones erupted with pings as comments clipped it instantly. A man 2 rows back leaned forward. "Ms. Royce, thank you for not letting this slide." Her nod was small but firm. At headquarters, corporate panic deepened. The multi-billion-dollar logistics deal, already fragile, was now in life support. The partners' leadership had issued a curt statement. "We are reviewing recent developments at Pinnacle Airways. Our values do not align with systemic bias." The CEO, not Quinella, but the figurehead executives answered to slammed his phone onto the table. "She's going to use this to gut us," he muttered. "Every weakness we have, she'll drag it out in public." The irony was brutal. The man called himself CEO, but he was merely an operator. The true architect, the majority shareholder, was sitting in 2A, calm as stone, letting the world watch. Meanwhile, on the plane, the atmosphere shifted completely. Passengers no longer whispered nervously. They watched with open awe. Some clapped quietly. Others mouthed, "Thank you." Victoria shrank. Her authority dissolved. She wasn't the platinum member anymore. She was the symbol of arrogance undone. And Quinella Royce, with one revelation, had rewritten the balance of power. The live stream passed 3 million. Zoe wiped her eyes. Viewers were watching history. She's not just a passenger. She's the one who runs the whole airline. This isn't a seating dispute. It's a revolution in real time. Comments screamed agreement. "This will change corporate America. Airline industry about to shake. Quinella Royce for president." The captain approached Quinella again, his face pale. "Ms. Royce, I had no idea. I assure you." She raised a hand, silencing him with grace rather than anger. "You don't need to assure me. You need to assure every passenger that what happened today will never happen again." Phones caught every word. By the time the aircraft rolled back to the gate, the consequences had already spiraled. Pinnacle's stock price dipped 12%. Rival airlines issued statements pledging equity reviews. Civil rights groups called for congressional hearings in Victoria Hartwell. She sat silent, trembling, her empire of entitlement collapsing in public view. The plane stopped through the window. Cameras waited on the jet bridge, flashes already popping. Quinella gathered her belongings slowly, every movement deliberate. She looked once more at Victoria. "This isn't about who I am. It's about who you thought I wasn't." With that, she rose, dignity intact, power in disguise. If one woman could ground a flight with dignity, what would happen when she turned the power on an entire industry? By the time Quinella Royce stepped off Flight 1847, the world outside was already on fire. Cameras flashed microphones, jostled reporters, shouted questions that blended into a single roar. She didn't answer any of them. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own thunder. Within hours, clips from the cabin had spread across every platform. What began as shaky phone footage now played on loop on national broadcasts. Anchors' voices carried over the images. Black woman refuses to move from seat, reveals she owns the airline. CEO grounds her own flight after racist confrontation. The numbers surged 2 million, 5 million, 10 million views. The internet had crowned its verdict long before the airline's executives finished their emergency meeting. The crisis had become a movement. The movement was about to become reform. In Washington, lawmakers tweeted statements within the hour. Some called for hearings. Others demanded answers from Pinnacle Airways and from the entire industry. Civil rights groups issued press releases not in outrage alone, but with demands for structural change. At the FAA headquarters, regulators huddled, eyes glued to the viral video. If the owner herself was treated this way, what does that say about ordinary passengers? one asked grimly. Investigations began before the night ended. Across the industry, competitors scrambled. Delta, United American all issued late-night statements. The words were predictable. We are committed to ensuring every passenger travels with dignity. But beneath the polished phrases was panic. If Pinnacle, whose CEO had just exposed bias inside her own cabin, became the standard bearer for reform, every other airline would be forced to follow. The ripple effect wasn't optional, it was inevitable. At Pinnacle's headquarters, executives faced Quinella for the first time since the reveal. She entered the boardroom the way she had entered 2A, calm, deliberate, unshaken. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "you've seen the videos. You've read the headlines. You know the numbers. This is no longer about one passenger's behavior or one crew's mistake. This is about how the entire airline industry operates." Silence. No one dared to interrupt. You asked a black woman with a legitimate boarding pass to move for a white passenger who had none. You tried to call it compromise. The world has seen it for what it is, discrimination, and we will not bury it under apologies. A director shifted uneasily. "With respect, Miss Royce, the financial damage is severe. Bookings are down 15% in one day. The stock has lost billions in value. We're hemorrhaging." Quinella's eyes didn't waver. "Good pain forces change. If we want to survive, we must rebuild differently." Social media didn't slow. Hashtags multiplied. Petitions circulated. Celebrities posted their reactions. An actor with 50 million followers tweeted, "Quinella Royce just changed the game. Respect." A business mogul wrote, "Airlines better take notes. Accountability is no longer optional." The story moved beyond outrage into organizing. Advocacy groups held live streams. Churches and community centers played the clips during meetings. Parents showed it to their children as proof that dignity mattered more than silence. This was no longer a scandal. It was a cultural reckoning. At the New York Stock Exchange Airlines, stocks slid further. Analysts speculated about systemic risk. Some downgraded the entire sector. Meanwhile, tech firms and equity funds with strong diversity reputations surged, investors rushing to align with the future. One commentator put it plainly, "If one black woman can ground an airline with dignity, imagine what happens when systemic reform becomes the demand." This isn't just turbulence. It's a new flight plan. What happens when markets begin rewarding justice instead of excuses? Inside the airline, change moved faster than ever before. Training programs were redesigned overnight. Complaint systems were rewritten to ensure no report could be buried. Executives who had long resisted reform found themselves sidelined. But Quinella pushed further. She convened a cross-industry summit calling in leaders from competitors, regulators, unions, and advocacy groups. Cameras captured her standing at the podium, her voice carrying across the hall. This isn't about Pinnacle alone. What happened on Flight 1847 happens everywhere. The difference is that this time the victim had the power to expose it. But real change doesn't come from one viral video. It comes from structural reform that protects every passenger regardless of who they are or what they look like. The applause was thunderous. Back in living rooms across the country, people watched. Some cried, others nodded. Stories poured out accounts of being asked to move, of being disrespected, of being ignored. Hashtags became testimony threads. The world realized that Quinella's stand was not rare. It was the rule finally breaking, and governments noticed. European regulators announced reviews. Asian carriers issued new guidelines. South American airlines pledged transparency reports. The ripple had become global, but the pushback came too. Lobbyists warned of costs. Unions worried about contracts. Shareholders fretted about profits. Cable commentators sneered. Is this really discrimination or just a misunderstanding? Quinella addressed it directly in an interview. Her gaze was steady, her voice calm. When a person with power dismisses someone without, that is bias. When a system trains its staff to prioritize comfort over fairness, that is discrimination. And when corporations bury complaints, that is systemic. What we saw on Flight 1847 was not an error. It was the truth uncovered. Viewers leaned in, nodding. Even critics struggled to counter her clarity. In the weeks that followed, concrete reforms began to take shape. A federal task force drafted new rules for airline accountability. Pinnacle rolled out a new digital complaint tracking system visible to the public. Competitors were forced to match it or face scrutiny. And every time resistance arose, Quinella's words echoed back. Pain forces change. Victoria Hartwell's world, meanwhile, collapsed. Her real estate firm lost clients overnight. Contracts were canceled. Charities quietly removed her from their boards. The woman who once sat smugly in 2A now hid from cameras, her name synonymous with arrogance undone. Passengers who had witnessed the scene gave interviews describing Quinella's calm, her dignity, her refusal to move. Each account added weight to the legend forming around her. She had become more than a CEO. She was a symbol. And yet Quinella never claimed victory. When asked if she felt vindicated, she replied simply, "Vindication implies the fight is over. It isn't. We're just at takeoff." The answer lit up feeds again, replayed with music overlays and hashtags. People found strength in it. Teachers quoted it in classrooms, pastors in sermons, parents in dinner conversations. The crisis had become a movement. The movement had become reform. Yet could any system built on exclusion survive what came next? The questions were no longer confined to one cabin. They echoed across newsrooms, boardrooms, and dinner tables. Yet could any system built on exclusion survive what came next for Victoria? Hartwell. The answer arrived quickly and brutally. When she left the aircraft under the watchful eyes of reporters, her once impeccable mask was gone. Tear-streaked makeup, trembling hands clutching her designer-toed eyes, or darting as microphones thrust forward. Every camera caught the contrast. The woman who had claimed superiority, now stripped of composure. "Mrs. Hartwell, do you regret your words?" shouted one reporter. "Is it true you said you people?" another demanded. "Do you still believe platinum status gives you special rights?" Her replies faltered. I was misunderstood. I never meant." The excuses crumbled under the weight of replayed footage. The world had already judged her. By nightfall, her name was a trending tag of its own. Memes mocked her arrogance. Think pieces dissected her entitlement. Corporate partners fled. Contracts evaporated. Within a week, her real estate empire, once a symbol of inherited privilege, was bleeding clients. She was removed from boards, uninvited from galas whispered about at country clubs. The downfall of Victoria Hartwell became a public cautionary tale. News coverage memes, petitions, corporate training modules, and dinner table conversations. Her personal collapse, family shame, social exile, economic ruin was broadcast in real time, shared by millions. But justice was not limited to her. Captain Rodriguez faced immediate suspension. For decades, his voice had commanded authority in the cockpit. Now, recordings of him suggesting Quinella should move replayed on primetime television. "Is this your idea?" Fairness hosts asked. Airline forms buzzed. "If the captain won't protect fairness, who will?" He appeared before an internal review board. His shoulders slumped, his reputation shredded. He tried to explain. "I was trying to keep peace to avoid delay," but every word sounded like cowardice. Passengers didn't want captains who avoided conflict at the cost of justice. They wanted leaders who enforced it. His career, once steady as a flight plan, spiraled downward. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant, faced her own reckoning. At first, she was vilified, the face of compromise, the woman who suggested the rightful passenger should yield. But as the days passed, nuance emerged. She spoke in interviews, voice trembling, admitting the truth. "I was trained to de-escalate at all costs. That training taught me to look for the person most likely to comply. I didn't even realize how wrong that was until I saw myself on video. I watched it and thought I failed." Her honesty touched some. Others remain unforgiving. But she became a symbol too, not of malice, but of how systemic bias embeds itself in procedure. Inside Pinnacle Airways, firings and resignations swept like a storm. Executives who had crafted hollow statements were ousted. Diversity officers who had served as window dressing were replaced with leaders empowered to act. Employees who had filed discrimination complaints for years suddenly saw their files reopen, their voices amplified. It was messy, raw, painful. But it was justice long delayed now arriving in waves. The media fed on it daily. Nightly news played side-by-side clips, calm defiance versus Victoria's sneer. Newspapers ran timelines from C2A to Global Reckoning. Late-night comedians mocked the arrogance of loyalty points as a personality. Documentarians pitched series before the month was over. And everywhere people debated, was Victoria's ban from Pinnacle for life enough? Should the captain lose his license? Should Sarah be given a second chance? Should the FAA force all airlines into reform? The story had outgrown the cabin. It was now a mirror held to society. Quinella remained measured through it all. She did not gloat. When asked about Victoria, she said simply, "What happened to her is the consequence of her choices, but the larger issue is the system that enabled those choices." She declined to answer questions about lawsuits or settlements. Her silence on personal vengeance spoke louder than any condemnation. She wasn't after one woman's downfall. She was after systemic change. This is the personal cost of a single moment when prejudice spills into public and the world does not forget. At community gatherings, people told their own stories. I was once asked to give up my seat in first class. I've been told I didn't belong in the lounge. They assumed I couldn't afford the ticket. Every story ended the same. Now, thanks to Quinella, they can't ignore us anymore. Victoria Hartwell's name became shorthand. In workshops and corporate seminars, facilitators would ask, "Are you behaving like a Hartwell right now?" assuming entitlement without evidence. The answer was always clear. To be called a Hartwell was to be called out for Quinella. The justice served in Part 7 was not the endgame. It was a necessary reckoning, a balancing of scales. The villain's arrogance was punished. The system's cracks were exposed. And the world understood that silence no longer protected prejudice. But the question lingered. If one woman could topple entitlement with dignity, how far could the consequences travel? Because justice had been served, and the ripple of that justice was still moving outward, ready to strike at deeper foundations. Justice had been delivered. Victoria Hartwell's name was now shorthand for entitlement undone, and Pinnacle Airways was forced into reforms it could no longer avoid. But Quinella Royce knew justice was only the first step. Her vision reached further. Within weeks, Pinnacle announced sweeping measures, transparent complaint, tracking independent oversight committees, new codes of conduct woven into every layer of training. Rival airlines pressured by the viral tide rushed to copy them. International carriers convened emergency meetings, fearing regulatory mandates if they did not act voluntarily. The cabin incident had become the spark for a new flight plan, one charted on fairness, not privilege. In Washington, hearings filled the airwaves. Lawmakers played clips of Quinella's calm defiance. Advocacy leaders testified that her experience mirrored thousands of untold stories. One senator leaned into the microphone and asked if even the owner of the airline can be told she doesn't belong. What chance does the average passenger have? The silence that followed was answer enough. The FAA responded with new draft regulations, mandatory bias training, transparent reporting, penalties for repeat offenders. Airlines bristled, but the public demanded it. Across oceans, European and Asian regulators echoed the call. South American carriers pledged their own reforms. The turbulence had gone global. For ordinary people, the change was immediate and visceral. Families felt safer booking trips. Passengers who once whispered about humiliation now spoke openly, confident their voices mattered. Stories poured in: parents traveling with children, seniors dismissed at counters, women questioned in lounges. Each testimony added fuel to the reforms. At churches, barber shops, universities, the conversation kept unfolding. Communities dissected the incident not just as drama, but as a lesson. Dignity is not negotiable. One mother told her daughter, "You see what she did? She didn't shout, she didn't run, she stood." And the world moved. Corporate America took notice. Diversity workshops replaced outdated slides with footage from Flight 1947. Executives studied Quinella's composure like a case study in leadership. Some embraced it sincerely, others reluctantly, but none could ignore it. Stock analysts marveled at the paradox: Pinnacle shares had fallen. Yet Quinella's personal reputation soared. Investors began asking, do we measure a company's worth only in dollars or also in dignity? The question would not fade because dignity had become a metric the market could no longer ignore. At Black Stories Unveiled, we share these stories not to celebrate scandal, but to illuminate transformation. Because when one act of defiance becomes a blueprint for reform, the legacy belongs not to one person, but to all of us. Meanwhile, Quinella worked quietly on something beyond press releases and hearings. She convened private meetings with education leaders, community organizers, and young professionals. Her focus shifted from punishment to preparation, from tearing down bias to building up opportunity. She announced the formation of a fellowship program for underrepresented students in aviation and technology. Scholarships flowed in her name, though she downplayed it publicly. Mentors were paired with young women who dreamed of careers once considered out of reach. The grace she planned was not a single gesture. It was a foundation. Yet the debates raged on. Critics on talk shows accused her of overreach. Is it really her place to reform an entire industry? They scoffed. Others warned of cost delays, stock volatility. Quinella remained unbothered. In an interview, she said, "When people ask if it's my place, I remind them it became my place the moment prejudice sat in my seat. Change doesn't need permission. It needs persistence." Her words rippled outward. Students quoted them in essays, pastors in sermons, activists in chants. Victoria Hartwell, meanwhile, had vanished from public view. Her name, once tied to luxury developments, now lived in hashtags of shame. Lawsuits loomed, investors pulled out. Her fall served as ongoing evidence. Arrogance may dominate a moment, but it cannot dominate history. Even so, Quinella resisted vindictiveness. She never once called Victoria's name in her speeches. To her, the point was not a single downfall. It was the dismantling of a culture that let downfalls be inevitable. One evening at a community forum streamed online, a teenager asked her directly, "Do you ever think about revenge?" Quinella smiled gently. "Revenge is about looking backward. Grace is about building forward, and the future deserves better than grudges." The clip went viral overnight. People replayed it, not for spectacle, but for hope. The fellowship program filled quickly. Applications poured in from across the country. One young woman wrote, "I was on that flight. I watched you stand firm. Because of you, I believe I can pursue this path." Quinella read it privately, her eyes moist. It was proof that the true impact of Flight 1847 was not in stock prices or headlines. It was in the hearts of those who felt invisible and now felt seen. For Quinella, this wasn't just about an airline. It was about rewriting what power meant. Not the power to ground flights, but the power to lift people. And yet she knew the most powerful gesture was still to come. Not a policy, not a press conference, not a headline. A single act of grace that would define her legacy. She began preparing quietly. Meetings scheduled, documents drafted, lawyers consulted. The plan, when unveiled, would not absolve the past, but it would redirect the future. It would prove that dignity is not just defended, it is also shared. Months had passed since Flight 1847, yet the world still pulsed with its echoes. The reforms it sparked were no longer headlines. They were reality. Airlines logged complaints publicly. Governments drafted accountability laws, training manuals, rewrote entire chapters. But Quinella Royce knew laws and policies were only part of the legacy. The deeper change required grace, the kind that touched not just systems, but people. She had been planning quietly, weaving together strands of law, philanthropy, and vision. And now the moment had come. In a packed auditorium, cameras flashed. Community leaders filled rows. Journalists readied their pens. Quinella walked onto the stage with her calm, deliberate stride. She did not need fanfare. Her presence was its own spotlight. She began simply. "On Flight 1847, I was told I didn't belong in my own seat. I was told to move to compromise, to be smaller. That moment revealed what too many have lived for too long. But justice cannot end with exposure. It must continue with construction." Her voice carried through the hall, firm yet warm. That is why today I announce the creation of the Royce Fellowship for Aviation and Leadership. 100 scholarships every year, fully funded, for underrepresented students who dream of flight, whether as pilots, engineers, executives, or innovators. No young person will be told they don't belong in this industry. Not anymore. The audience erupted, applause rolling like thunder. What she was about to do with one gesture would outlast every headline. But there was more. Quinella raised a hand for silence. This fellowship will not bear my name alone. It will carry the name of every passenger who has ever been told they don't belong. And the first recipient will come from a family that until recently knew me only as an adversary. The room held its breath. Victoria Hartwell's granddaughter has applied to aviation school. She will be among the first to receive this fellowship. Gasps, shock, debate whispered instantly. Some applauded the grace, others frowned at the mercy. She tried to humiliate you. A reporter called out later, "Why honor her family?" Quinella's answer was measured timeless because the fight is not against a child's dreams. It's against the arrogance that tells her she doesn't deserve them. Grace is not weakness. It is strength refusing to be poisoned by resentment. The line reverberated, spreading across feeds, spurring arguments. Was it forgiveness or folly? Vision or naivety? The debate itself proved the point. Harriet legacy would not be neat, but it would be enduring at Black Stories Unveiled, and we honor not just victories of power, but acts of grace that turn power into legacy. Because when a Black woman lifts others, even when she could choose retribution, she leaves the world with a story it cannot ignore. In the weeks that followed, headlines split. Some hailed Quinella as a visionary CEO builds bridge of grace after industry reckoning. Others questioned, should grace be extended to the entitled? But everywhere the conversation raged. In classrooms, children debated whether they would have made the same choice. In churches, pastors quoted her words about grace and strength. At board meetings, executives asked if legacy could mean more than quarterly profit. The Hartwell family issued a muted statement acknowledging the fellowship without addressing Victoria's downfall. The silence was its own verdict. Meanwhile, the first class of Royce Fellows began training. Young women and men, many of them first-generation college students, stepped into aviation with scholarships that bore the weight of Quinella's stand. They carried her name, her moment, her lesson. Never move for someone who believes you don't belong. For Quinella herself, the Grace Act brought peace. She had not excused Victoria. The consequences still stood, but she had chosen to turn the final page toward building, not breaking. At a later interview, she was asked, "What do you hope your legacy will be?" She smiled gently. Legacy isn't a statue or a title. Legacy is the seat you leave behind for someone else, and mine will never again be empty. For Quinella Royce, justice was served, but grace became the true revolution. And then came the final hook. The question that carried the story beyond her into the audience listening. If you had the power to choose, would you demand retribution, or would you dare to leave grace as your legacy?